Well, hello and welcome to the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy. Today, our guest is Jasmine Grace, a survivor of sex trafficking and drug addiction and founder and director of Jasmine Grace Outreach. Before we begin our conversation, I would like to thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. As always, you can support the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy by subscribing to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and by following us on Facebook and Instagram. Also, please remember to leave a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated. So let's get right into this. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast. This is really, I think it'll be a learning experience for all of our viewers. So can you first start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As you said, my name is Jasmine. I'm from Massachusetts, from the North Shore specifically. And now I live in Nashua, New Hampshire. I have 5 kids. I homeschool a couple. Wow. I make fun of myself because I drive a minivan.
Jasmine, how old are the kids?
They go from 19, 15, 13, 11, and 5.
God bless you.
That's a big family. I had 2 and I was overwhelmed all the time. So that's great. So tell us a little bit. I'm not sure if we want to just get right into this. What do you think, Nancy?
Jasmine, we had done a human trafficking introduction with the Women's Center in New Bedford.
Right.
And we wanted to follow that up with a story. And I think we have a mutual friend, Michelle Belong, who had given me your contact information. And stories is so powerful. So really what we wanted to accomplish with today's show was just the impact that your story alone tells. Mm-hmm. And again, where you are right now and your initiatives and the tremendous job you've done to really push this issue forward. Mm-hmm. So let's start, I guess, with what you're comfortable with, of course, but just with your story. And I have your book posted in front of us, The Diary of Jasmine Grace, Trafficked, Recovered, and Redeemed, which I read this weekend, which was fantastic. So tell us, a little bit about that, what you want to accomplish with the book and just with your story.
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for having me and being able to spread awareness this way through my story. And reading the book in a weekend, I'm impressed.
It was an easy read. It was really well written. It had a great message.
Great. Thank you. Some people say it's a hard read, so I'm glad to hear. It all is about perspective and where you're coming from. In the book, actually, is based on all my journal entries from when I was trafficked. So one of the best healthy coping skills I managed while I was in my trafficking situation for 5 years was to actually write in all my notebooks what was going on with me mentally and emotionally. It wasn't the horrific details of my life, but really what was going on in the mind, because I was in such a state of mind control or brainwashing, coercion, and in a constant state of fear that the only way I could escape was to write it down and get it out of my mind. But I didn't have anyone in my life that I could trust, that I could confide in. And so that was the one good thing I did. And I managed to save all those journals. And years later, after I got out, felt led to write a book. But I didn't want to just write my story because I felt like survivors had written their stories, and that's great, but I just felt like there had to be something a little different. And so I went back into all those old journals. I managed to save them at my parents' house, and I started a blog. And so every week I would go to Starbucks or Panera when my youngest was in preschool, and I would take those 2 hours and I would start the blog by writing exactly what was in those notebooks. And then I didn't want to leave people hopeless and depressed, so I would put a present day reflection. To let people know that we do recover and there is a better way and there's hope out there. And I wanted to reach the women who had been exploited, who maybe were currently in situations, and then the people who were going to read it as a way of education to raise awareness. Because so many people ask me, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just walk away? And I really wanted them to understand the mental and emotional bondage that happens when you're in that kind of situation. So I think it's a great read for everybody, even prevention standpoint, young girls and boys to read about really what happens in trafficking situations, because it's not what we see in the movies. Right. It is a real life thing right from my journal entry. So that's why I put the present day reflection as well, and finally finished it in 2 years and got it published into the book. And women would email me right away and tell me that I was helping them, that they were in the same situation. And that's when I realized how impactful it would be. And I was just so grateful to be able to have that opportunity and do that, which leads me to say, how did I get in my trafficking situation in the first place? So we have to think about vulnerabilities. Everyone has them. It's just some people have more than others. We think of the ACE score, right? Adverse childhood experiences. For me, my ACE score is only a 4, so it's not extreme. I was not sexually abused as a child. I did not experience domestic violence in the home. I didn't even have parents who were addicted to drugs or anything like that. My parents, still married to this day, but the dysfunction comes in where my mom struggled severely with mental illness. So she wasn't really able to provide that care and nurture that we all need. And as you know, and many people realize, what is our number one need as humans? It's to be loved and to belong. And sadly, I just didn't receive that because my mom struggled. I had a big extended family. I had only one sibling who was 10 years older than me, and he did experience abuse at a young age. So by the time I came around, he wasn't really interested in connecting. He had lots of trauma. But I come from a big Italian Catholic family, so my father's parents were very kind and loving, and I'd call them Nani and Papa, and we'd eat Sunday dinner, macaroni and meatballs, and I'd sleep over, and I always felt so loved and connected there, and so I really enjoyed going there. And I realized that because my grandparents instilled some type of connection and love, that later on in life, through my trafficking journey and my addiction history, I knew that I wasn't created for this. I knew that there was something else out there, that this wasn't supposed to be my life. And that's what I would hang on to. And that's what I think enabled me to dig a little deeper and to get clean and sober and put down that lifestyle and change. So I've been out of the commercial sex trade at this point now, about 15 years. And I started an organization called Jasmine Grace Outreach because we reach women that are vulnerable, that have exploitation and addiction issues. We all know how closely linked substance abuse is to the commercial sex trade. And so we really reach them women that are in jail, that are in halfway houses, that are trying to get sober, but they can't put down the lifestyle because they don't know how to make money regularly. Right. And so they might get clean, but then they struggle financially, so they go do what they're used to doing, or they're connected to an old boyfriend, or some guy that's exploiting them. They don't even see it that way. And before you know it, the shame of involving yourself or engaging in the commercial sex trade pushes you back out. You relapse and you get kicked out of the program, and the cycle just continues. So we really try to reach them women in those vulnerable places. We give them bags of hope. They're filled with toiletries, soap, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste. We give out over 1,000 bags a year all over Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. We mentor women. We run groups. We give them survivor leadership opportunities. Really love to pass the baton along, because once women realize that they're survivors and no longer victims, they're empowered. And that's like one of my most favorite things. So I have 2 employees, one in Mass, one here with me in New Hampshire. And we have 3 survivors on the team who have, again, gone through our groups, gotten a bag of hope, and now they do the work. And that's, again, one of my favorite aspects. And we do a lot of public speaking and awareness and trainings and so forth. So that's kind of, the vulnerabilities of how I got involved in the commercial sex trade, how I got trafficked, and where I am now. But if you want to ask me more specific questions, I can keep on going. But
yeah,
I don't know.
if you don't mind, I'm sure our audience is very interested a bit about how all this occurs. So let's go back to, I guess, when it started, if you don't mind talking about it. How old were you, and what were the specifics in regards to how you ended up in the situation that you ended up in?
Yeah. So the specifics for me, not feeling that love, connection, that belonging, and having my own vulnerabilities. Started drinking and drugging 12, 13 years old, hanging out with older boys, doing things I shouldn't have been doing, spelling love, sex, right? Because I didn't know that's not what you were supposed to do. And if I wasn't giving it away, they were taking it. So I did experience sexual violence as a teen and never got any support or help around that. So you carry shame. And there goes your self-identity and your self-worth. But I never dreamed of becoming a prostitute. That was nothing on my list. I remember watching Pretty Woman as a kid, and that was glamorized and accepted. And that's the thing that you have to realize is that in our culture, a lot of times that stuff, the commercial sex trade, women's bodies, like how overly objectified and glamorous that is all made to be. And I'm saying all that to let you know that the higher your ACE score, the more vulnerabilities and violence and abuse you've experienced as a child, the less amount of grooming the trafficker has to do once they meet you, right? So if a young girl is sexually abused as a young kid and she's running away from a foster care system, she's running away from a home where she's being abused, and she's 12, 13, and a trafficker comes along and promises her what was so freely taken is now going to get paid for, this seems like an upgrade, right? Because that dial's already been turned. And he doesn't have to do as much grooming because the prior abuse has already primed her for that. And so there's research that says women who end up in the commercial sex trade, about 80 to 90% of them have been sexually abused as children. So me, again, not experiencing that abuse as a kid, but as a teen and not having anywhere to help me figure that out, was very independent, went to vocational high school. I became a hairdresser at 18. I was working at a salon, going to community college for journalism. I had dreams and goals, but I was also very vulnerable. And I meet this guy at a local nightclub and he bought me a drink. He spent $7 on me and I was impressed. That's all it took. And he was handsome and he had a lot of cash and he was dressed nicely. And we exchanged phone numbers and got together a few days later. And he shows up in his Mercedes Benz. And there were clear red flags, right? Obviously, he was a drug dealer, which again is glamorized and totally normalized in our society, especially in the hip hop and rap culture. And I think nothing of it. I don't care. And we start to date. And before I know it, he's grooming me and he's dropping little seeds of doubt in my mind. He would say things like, well, why would you want to work at a hair salon? You can own one. Why would you want to go to school for journalism? That's stupid. I know a way we can make a lot of money. You can have a family, a business. We can have a home. We can have anything that you want. And this is the kicker, is that the commercial sex trade is always sold as women's empowerment. And I'll tell you, it does give you a false sense of power and a false sense of security. But it is so, so damaging, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. You do not come out of the commercial sex trade unscathed. And so a lot of young girls, women get involved because they want to, better themselves or get ahead. But it's inherently dangerous. It is all about gender inequality. It's just such a lie that we try to fool ourselves into believing. We never get ahead because as quick as that money comes in, as quick as it goes, the drugs come right around the corner. It's inevitable. And never mind when you have a trafficker involved, the abuse and the torment that you go through. So of course, he made it sound like a fantasy, right? He was selling me this amazing opportunity, and slowly but surely the grooming process was taking place. And I have a best friend who gets involved in the life and I don't realize it. She has a new boyfriend, and that's kind of normal at 19 years old. They don't see you for a couple of weeks because you're enamored with a new guy. And I happen to get invited to a college party at Salem State University, and all these college boys are drinking. And they tell me that a stripper is going to come for the entertainment. I think nothing of it. Again, totally normalized until the girl walks in and she goes to take off her clothes, and I realize it's my best friend. And so we cried, we ruined the party, they kick us out. And I say that to bring awareness to the fact that so many men and boys don't realize, these women that are involved in the commercial sex trade, whether it's prostitution, on a screen, at a strip club, pornography, wherever it is, that they really don't want to be there, right? The majority of them. If they told you what was really going on in their life, you wouldn't want to purchase that time with them because it's all a fantasy. And if we want to end sex trafficking, if we want to end commercial exploitation, we need to talk about the demand side, right? Because unfortunately, men push the demand. If there wasn't such a demand, there wouldn't have to be such a supply. And that goes into a whole nother conversation about how young boys are exposed to pornography younger and younger today because of the internet, and how they get addicted, and it changes the brain, and it pushes them to become purchasers sooner or later. It's a whole conversation, but and no condemnation, right? Shame to any man who's ever engaged in pornography or strip club or anything like that. I'm just trying to help you understand the awareness behind that, and really how you want to have these conversations with the men and boys in your life, because this is such an epidemic, and huge amounts of women and young girls are lured into the commercial sex trade. And again, the damage takes years to come out and years to recover. And I also want to say that the grooming process is so insidious. Like, my traffickers want to make you believe you chose that life. So if you chose it, you became a willing participant, and it's your fault, so you stay longer. And so you mix that in with the hope of, oh, he's going to change. He promises he's going to change. Or then it's I don't want to do all this work that I've done for nothing. So I'm going to stick it out, because I have to hold on to hope that he's going to change, that everything that he told me is going to come true is. And that's kind of what happened in my mind during those 5 years that I was with him. He talked me into it. I believed the lie, and take responsibility. Yeah. I thought this was a good idea. Like, okay, we can get ahead. I want him to love me. I love him, and we're going to have a home and a family and a business. And I had to do this for a short time. So I was willing to do that. And by the time I changed my mind, he starts to use violence as a way to keep me under his control. So you guys all know what domestic violence is. It's like that, but on steroids, right? Because of the shame for what's happening through the exploitation. Yeah. And would end up working at different massage parlors in Connecticut, Kittery, Maine. And after Maine got busted, there was a young girl working there. She was your typical story. She was 13. She was a runaway from the foster care system, but she had an aunt who was looking for her. And the aunt kept calling the social workers and had a tip that she got brought up to work at that place. And there was money laundering issues and all types of other things. The feds did a 2-year surveillance and finally busted it. And I had a sense the place was going to get closed. So my trafficker let me leave, but only because Craigslist became popular and other adult websites. So now I'm on the internet, he's posting ads, and I'm working all over New England, which is inherently more dangerous, in and out of people's homes and businesses. When, the coworkers and the workers aren't there, the wife and kids are gone. The fancy hotels in Boston, men coming in from other states. Right. Totally just so much more violent and dangerous behind closed doors. And also working online led me to meet a man who called me from Craigslist, and I went to his house and nothing happened. And he just paid me a lot of money. And week after week, I would continue to go back, and we would just hang out, watch TV, and have a good time. And he'd pay me a lot of cash. And so somewhere in my mind, he became safe because nothing sexual was happening. And he was Italian. He was from East Boston. We just got along. It was great. And he would be definitely someone that is important in the story. As we move forward, I'll finish it up. I'll tell you after. But when a woman's ready to leave the commercial sex trade, she needs one safe, supportive person to reach out to, because she's so isolated. So you don't know who that safe person is going to be. But I'll tell you, the way to be a safe person is to be non-judgmental, supportive, listen more than you talk, right? And be compassionate and just wait, because it takes so many attempts for this victim to leave. You're going to want to shake her and be like, just get out, but it's going to take so many attempts. It takes so much mental energy. Never mind if the woman's struggling with substance abuse, mental health issues, or all these problems make it that much harder to leave. And you just have to be patient and non-judgmental as possible, because she really does need a lifeline, and you don't know if that can be you.
It's really interesting as you've been speaking. I'm thinking back to podcasts we've had on domestic violence, and there's such a similarity in the manipulation and brainwashing that goes on between, it seems, domestic violence victims and human trafficking victims. And I'm sure there are differences, but I'm seeing a lot of similarities. The loss of confidence that comes from the abuser doing what they do, all of that. It's there's a lot of the same psychological manipulation, it seems to me.
Jasmine, you know what you said too in just a few minutes ago, where people think you can just walk away. And I think that's what your book does a really great job with too. It's like, it's not just, oh, you can leave anytime you want. You make yourself so vulnerable in the book. And I think that's why it will have such a big impact to anyone who reads it. But it's so, the situation's so much more complex because you're vested emotionally. You've been manipulated, you've been groomed. And that creates a really complex situation that it's not easy to walk away from when your probably self-confidence is at the lowest and you don't know how you're going to care for yourself. And you talked about that safe person.
So when you go ahead. I'm sorry. Please, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was going to say also the manipulation, the mind. So what was I? A no good, dirty prostitute. And that was all I was going to be for the rest of my life. And no one would love me. No one would marry me. This is the things that he would say to me over and over again. And I believed it. So it's really linked to your identity, right? And so you think about that trauma as a child, that inconsistency of care as a child, like all those things linked to our identity. And then you hear that over and over again for so long, that's it, and you see yourself that way. And so it's really hard to exit, plus all the other insurmountable things laid on you, trauma, again, criminal records this thick with felony charges, right, to substance abuse, all those things. It's so hard to walk away. It's so hard to get out. It takes so long.
These the human traffickers are really, it sounds like they're really experts at psychological manipulation. It's really fascinating to me that they kind of all do the same thing, really, in probably different ways. But it's fascinating that they are able to, that they have that system, I guess, of manipulation. And the drug aspect of it, I mean, it sounds like there was drug issues that were going on before, but once you were kind of brought into their fold, did that accelerate? Did they purposely accelerate that to control you more?
Interesting. For me, I wasn't addicted at all during my 5 years under my trafficker. Yes. So I got addicted on the way out to make all that pain and trauma go away. But yes, a lot of women are introduced to drugs early on for the way a trafficker controls them. Or they're addicted on the way out to cope with all the trauma. It's very closely linked for sure. And I was going to say about the manipulation, the coercion. Yes, traffickers are excellent at that, but also want to say women can be traffickers too. I know I use the man terminology a lot, but a lot of women I work with were exploited or trafficked by their own mothers when they were children because the mother had a drug addiction, right? Sure. So she traded her daughter for drugs. And when those women that I work with today have the realization that, oh my gosh, my mother trafficked me first. And then when I met this pimp when I was 13, and he promised to save me from my foster care house, like, no wonder why I fell for it so easily.
I like the way your book, that you used your diary. It's amazing to me that diary stayed intact, all those diaries,
Yeah, it's remarkable that was even allowed, Like, did you do it secretly so that others wouldn't find the diary? I'm sure you had to.
Yeah, and I would hide them under my mattress or in my closet in like random places. And another good, healthy coping skill I guess I did was my grandmother used to always read Oprah magazines, and I would get to go visit her periodically. So my trafficker didn't come with me everywhere I went, right? I was in mental and emotional bondage. So I was trained, I did what I was supposed to do, and I always come back unless I was like running away and escaping from him. But this is where it comes in. I'd always go to my parents' house. So every time I'd move out or escape, I'd run to my parents' house. And I'm grateful that I had parents that always lived in the same place, right? A lot of women don't have parents to go to. They don't have a safe home to go to. So I'd go to my parents' house or I'd go to my grandparents. My grandmother would read those Oprah magazines. I'd take them and I'd always cut out all her positive quotes and all her inspiring things. And I'd put them in notebooks too. And that's how I would save those. And I'd, again, bury them in my mattresses, whatever. But going to my parents' house, he would just come there, sooner or later, badger, manipulate, make me cry, and I'd always go back. But I always bring stuff with me every time I leave. And I'd store it away at my parents'. And then I'd go back and it would happen again. And the cycle would just continue. And another good healthy thing I always managed to do, because he didn't come with me all the time, was go to the doctors. I saw my primary care physician constantly. And they did tag me as a domestic violence victim. And I saw that woman in the DV clinic one time, and she gave me, I don't know what kind of handout it was, but she basically looked me in the eyes and was like, you don't have to live this way. Like, you don't have to be abused. And I was like, wow, okay. You know, like, I couldn't make all the connections, but she planted little seeds of hope, right? And sooner or later, my primary care doctor, they would prescribe me all types of drugs. So I would always be self-diagnosing myself with headaches or ADHD or anxiety, depression. Thank God nothing worked. Like, I didn't get addicted to anything. Yeah, again, that would be a whole lot, another problem. But the nurse practitioner was always more compassionate and kind. And she would sit there and look me in the eyes and have conversations with me. Where the doctor was always like rushing me through, and he kind of like had his back turned and he would ask me questions. And I was there at least once or twice a month with all types of issues. And there was tons of red flags, but trafficking wasn't, trendy or wasn't a word then.
Right.
So it was more of the domestic violence.
They weren't really aware then of the depth of what you were going through, it sounds like. Is that right?
Right. And I wasn't able to articulate either. Like, I wasn't going to say, oh, he's my pimp, right? Because those words do not come out of your mouth.
Can you talk a little bit about how you finally were able to let go of that life?
Yeah. It had been the 5 years. My trafficker had talked to me to go into college to get an associate's degree in business.
Really?
So I was making so much money, and he had so many other women working for him. He wanted to run a business at the front. And so, okay, I went to college, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to work really hard for this degree because he can't take it away. And then I'm going to leave, right? So I kind of always had like a backup plan. And I did the 2 years, paid for everything in cash, made the dean's list, went to all my classes. So, right, you never know. A traffic victim in a community college, right? Like, it is a thing. It's possible. And I managed to graduate. And after those 2 years, unfortunately, became pregnant with his child. So a lot of traffickers do impregnate their women on purpose to keep more control, which is even more messy and a larger discussion. But I was wanting this baby because I thought I could retire. I could have everything he promised. I had the degree. We had made all the money. And he was forcing me to terminate the pregnancy. And in Massachusetts, there was some law, and I forget how many months or weeks you couldn't be pregnant to have an abortion. So I was holding on to that time, thinking if I just wait, then I won't be able to, and I can move forward. But he was threatening me if I didn't go, I would lose the baby in some other god-awful way. So unfortunately, I had to do what I had to do, and I was completely traumatized and so upset. And that's when the fire lit inside. I was like, you know what? You can use and abuse me all these years, but to take a life was just more than I could handle. So I started saving money without him noticing. And I'd put money in Ziploc bags. I'd tie it in elastics real tight, and I'd put it in the large potted plants because I knew he wouldn't look there for the money. And I wanted to save a few $1,000s so I can get my own apartment. Again, I used to always run back to my parents' house. That wasn't working. So I needed another plan. But how does a woman who has been in the commercial sex trade walk into a real estate agency and fill out an application? We can't.
Right.
But this is where that guy came along who I had seen that called me off Craigslist. I had somewhat of a relationship with him, and I reached out and I said, my name's not whatever, it's Jasmine. I'm in a lot of trouble. Can you lie and say that I work for you? Because he owns a small business, and he made me fake pay stubs. And that's how I was able to take my cash and these pay stubs and get my own apartment.
Nice.
And I called the local police, which I never would have done, right? Very trained, you don't rat, you don't, none of that. But I did. And the cop came and stood on the porch. I said, my boyfriend's going to get mad. Can you stay here? So the cop stood here. My trafficker stood there, and I left with 2 trash bags, right? Nothing. So again, you're leaving everything behind. That's hard.
It's really hard.
It's really hard to walk away from everything you purchased, right? All the good stuff, all the materialistic good stuff. And I leave with nothing, these 2 trash bags. I had a cat and a dog. I got into one of the cars that was in my name anyway, and I drove to my new place, and it was big and it was empty, and I was hopeless. I was suicidal. I had no idea how I was going to do this. And there's rules to this life, right? Like, generally speaking, that's not possible. You either get picked or, paid for by another pimp, or you go prostitute on your own and you're considered a renegade. And if you get caught, you get killed. Right. But I didn't care. Like, I was determined, kill me. It doesn't matter. I got to get out. Yeah. And so I went to my new apartment. I called my mom. I don't have the courage to tell her everything. And of course, she had seen all the insanity over those years. She never asked questions, but again, the door was always open, right? So I'm grateful. And she bought me some furniture, tried to help me put it together. I told her he made me do things I didn't really want to, but again, I couldn't articulate, couldn't verbalize. And weeks go by, and I call him back, right? Because of trauma bonds, right? I don't know how I'm going to do this. The whole Stockholm syndrome, everything like that. And I try to work out a deal. I'll live there. He lives there. I'll give him a cut of the money. And we get into a big fight and a lot of glass, broken door, blood, the whole thing. I call 911, and he was arrested for domestic violence charges, which was big. And I got a restraining order, which was even more of a big deal. And he stayed away. He left me alone. And that's when I tried to go work, as a secretary, 9 to 5. And I was falling asleep at the desk, and I couldn't pay my bills. And I was totally overwhelmed, and I was hanging out with new friends, and they were all coming over my big empty apartment, and OxyContin was popular.
Right.
And so I start dibbling and dabbling, just wanting, again, that pain to go away. But before I know it, I'm pushed back into that life of prostitution, not with a pimp, but with a growing drug habit.
Right.
And life would unravel. And then a few more years would go on, and addicted to heroin, sleeping on park benches, stealing from my grandparents that I told you about, like, really turned into someone I never would have imagined.
Jasmine, can you talk a little bit how important your faith was through all this? And I love one of the sentences in your book. You found faith in the backseat of a car. So talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So I was raised, again, Italian, Catholic, really didn't understand God in an intimate, personal way. It was more of like I was dirty and bad and going to hell in a handbasket, right, for lack of better words. But I knew, something existed bigger than myself. So there were times throughout my addiction where I would overdose, and EMTs would come and Narcan me to wake me up. And a few times these compassionate EMTs would look me in the eye and say, "What are you doing here? Go home." And it hit me so deeply. I would wonder, where's home, right? How do I get there? It's been almost a decade. Who am I? Again, knew I wasn't created to do this. There was such a bigger purpose for my life. It wasn't to end up on a park bench in Charlestown, right? It just took me so long. But there was a woman who was known to take girls off the street to church. And I was maybe 3 months clean. I had a little bit of sobriety time. And a woman took me to a Pentecostal church. I had never set foot in that kind of church before. And all I know is that the people were like happy, and they were experiencing and expressing their faith and their love and their joy for the Lord. And I wanted what they had because I was desperate. And I wanted that peace. And so the woman goes to take me home to the sober house I was living. And she's probably in her 60s, 70s. And she had her friends in the car. I'm surrounded, and I'm in the back. And she just turns around and she says to me, "Do you want to know how much Jesus loves you and he can wash you clean and forgive you?" And I said, "Yes, who is he?" I was just so desperate. And I prayed, and they prayed with me. I'm crying. And really, yes, I met the Lord in the backseat of a car. And that's appropriate because I've done a lot of unholy things. But for me, it teaches you, really how God reaches down into our muck and our mire, in our biggest shame. And he sees us and loves us anyway. That was big for me because, again, I was a dirty, no good, junkie prostitute, right? And so, from there, I would relapse shortly after, but it was almost like God had his hand on me. I had legit turned my life over, and he had a plan, and I had to get with the program. So it took me a little bit, but I finally got clean, sober, off the streets, put everything down, put it all away. In 2007. And again, it's been 15 years, and I made a lot of mistakes. Life is super hard and messy, especially when you get married and you have a lot of trauma. And
that should be the title of your next book, Jasmine. Super hard and messy.
Well, wanted to say wicked hard. Nothing.
Wicked hard.
Yeah, wicked.
That's a good one. Everyone asks me when the next one's coming. That's good.
So, one of the things when you talked about addiction, and for the listeners out there, I mean, there are a lot of people who are struggling with a loved one that's going through some type of addiction, whether it be their husband, their wife, their kids, their parents. And can you give a little insight as to, the phrases that we hear thrown around, if you love me, you stop. Why can't you just stop? You love this more than me. And why is it so hard to kind of kick addiction? And that can be like 3 more podcasts, but in a nutshell.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And the betrayal that the person feels, right? Because their loved one just can't stop. So you feel so betrayed. It's so hard. And how do you just continue to love and be there for someone who's so unlovable at that time, right? Because addiction makes you turn into someone you never would have imagined. And so you have to dig deep and have lots of boundaries and lots of compassion in hard conversations and mix in some grace and love in there. It's really hard. And I actually hate it. And it's bad. And I even talk to many mothers whose daughters are still out there, who are being exploited, who are being trafficked, who have an addiction. Some of them are missing. And you talk to these moms and these people who deal with this, and it's heartbreaking, and there's no easy fix. But you really do have to just hang on to hope and realize that every day that person is still alive, there's breath in their lungs. Anyone can get clean at any time. You just don't know when enough's going to be enough, when they're going to be tired, sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you've got to pray for that. Pray that they come to the end of themselves and be saved from themselves and can get clean. And there are so many good resources and programs for addiction and safe homes across the country for women who have come out of exploitation. There are so many resources today, and just keep offering that and offering that support for them.
You also talked about one of your diary entries was just for today, I will. And I really liked that because it is a day by day or an hour by hour or a minute by minute. And, success can also be measured in, for this 24 hours, I did a good job. Maybe the next 12 I screwed up, but I did it for a little while and I know I can do it again. So I really liked that you included that in your book as well. Jasmine, when we talk about educating others and we talk about, friends and family and healthcare workers and law enforcement, can you talk about some of the ways you've really educated those groups? I know family and friends we've talked about a little bit as just the non-judgmental and supportive and being there, but talk about some of the roles that you've played with educating law enforcement.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Healthcare.
Law enforcement and healthcare. Sometimes in combined settings, social workers. Yeah. And I always love the law enforcement. And I tell them, I don't expect you guys to be social workers. Like, you're there, you're going in to, fix the situation because there's crime involved. But I really help them look at the victims, especially women, right? Because women are the majority of the victims of sex trafficking. Yes, it happens to men and boys as well. But I really try to help law enforcement look at these young girls as someone's daughter. Right? They need that lens of compassion on them and realize that they don't need to be arrested, that they're in need of services, right? To kind of come alongside social workers and other people who are doing the work in the field to really wrap around and help them provide services that they need so they can stop making these choices or being forced to make these choices in their lives. And so many law enforcement I have spoken to early on would say to me, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I came to this training because I was always looking right past that, going for the drugs. I didn't realize that trafficking was happening there because I was trained to look for the drugs. So now they see that and they can make the connection of how many places they were in, how many raids they were involved in, and the women were right there. The victims were there and they walked right past.
I feel like there's
and
more.
And healthcare providers.
Yeah, I feel like there's more knowledge out there now, from the discussions we've had from a variety of podcasts. And there's just a lot of outreach in that. So I'm glad to hear that because you're right. I don't think victims were looked at as victims in the past. as they are now. So can I ask a question going back to your experience? And I'm curious about a couple of things. After you were able to turn your life around, did you ever go back to your healthcare provider and kind of sit down and say, hey, this is what was going on with me for the last 15 years? I'm just curious, because it sounds like they kind of didn't really know. They knew somewhat. They thought you were more, they treated you as a domestic violence victim, but it was so much more than that going on in your life, obviously. Did you ever have a conversation with them? I'm just curious how that went, if you did.
Yeah, I never got a chance to go back to that primary care physician. And I saw him from the time I was 18 to, my late 20s. But I never got a chance to. I think he left that clinic sooner, after I had got clean. And he really saw me more during the trafficking. But the active addiction, I never went to the doctors. So there was sporadic then, at the end with my active addiction.
But you should send him a copy of your book.
Well, you know what I was thinking too is do they have copies of your book in the various rehab places? Because that would be a great book to have there.
Yes, and some of the rehab definitely we give away the book on purpose to many of the women. So when we run a group, we bring a bunch of books, give them away. I don't know if you're familiar with South Bay or the jail in Boston. So one time they bought 300 copies of that book. And oh my gosh, we've met women randomly throughout the years that have read the book in jail and really the impact it's made on their lives because they see their stories in there.
Right.
And it helps them realize that they're not alone. They're not the only one. Oh my gosh, I'm a survivor too. It's been really amazing.
Jasmine, when you were involved in human trafficking, there must have been a lot of other women that you came across that were also involved. Did any of them get out, or were there a lot of sad stories? Because I think you're a minority, I'm guessing, but I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. For example, the women that I worked with in Maine, so that massage parlor, if you ever feel like Googling it, it was pretty infamous. It was around for like 20, 30 years. And it was called the Danish Health Club. And the way you worked there was you went to real massage therapy school and you gave a certificate with a lot of cash, the lawyer, and he apparently paid off the police chief, and that's how it stayed open. So a lot of the women that worked there were from my area. Again, I was raised in North Shore, so like Revere, Saugus area. Girls I went to middle school with ended up getting trafficked because there was, traffickers work in groups, right? So my trafficker had a family of like 5 or 6 traffickers, and they had a bunch of girls. Well, there was this other group of traffickers who were notorious from my area, who were known to pick up women for years. Okay, so it's also generational. Your father's a pimp, you're a pimp, your uncle, your cousin, and that's how it gets passed down. So a lot of women I worked with in Maine were from the other side of the tracks, so to speak, with this other family. And I remember once I got clean and sober and put everything down, I would go into Target. And there was a woman who worked there who still struggled to leave that life behind. And she was trying to work at Target to like stop, but she couldn't. She no longer had the pimp, but she couldn't figure out how to like really engage in working a square job. Another girl that I knew had a baby by her trafficker. And she finally escaped from him and was able to get a normal job in the healthcare profession and buy herself a home. And she's reached out to me through Facebook and she says, I'm so proud of you. That's so amazing. I won't tell anyone what's ever happened to me. I'm too ashamed. Plus, that's her son's father, right? So that's messy. So many other women are drug addicts still to this day, still on the street, still struggling. My best friend, the girl who I told you walked in for that party, I've never seen her since. I can't find her on the internet. But by God's grace, I dropped off my son one time at a football practice. And don't you know, her trafficker's brother was walking through the parking lot and we met and he spilled all the beans. And he told me everything that has gone on for the past few years. By this point, I had written my book. I was doing my nonprofit. And I had just spoken at Harvard, right? So I felt all smart and I had the lanyard on that said Harvard. And we're in the parking lot and he just tells me everything that her trafficker, his brother, had a stroke. He was in his 40s. He was perfectly healthy, and he had a stroke in the gym, and he lost all control of the left side of his body. And while he was in and out of the hospital for a year or two, she stole $60,000 and bought herself a house. And so right there was my perfect in to tell him, first of all, she didn't steal it. How would you like it if someone did that to your daughter that you're dropping off at cheerleading right now? And I really got to stick it to him, but he gave me the whole excuse. I know I never really wanted to do it. My brother did it. And he gave me all these excuses. So anyways, I felt redemption there in that point. He had known I wrote a book because he said, oh, and I heard you wrote a book. And I was like, yep, sure did. And I was just happy to hear that my friend got out and got herself a house. And
nice.
That is rare. Most of us, again, have severe trauma, tack it on to our prior abuse as children. That mental health issues and substance abuse, it takes years. It takes a long time. And so many women die in active addiction. It's actually so sad.
So, Jasmine, it sounds like we've come kind of a far way in the last 10 or 15 years to really make this a cause and really start doing something about it as a society. And you talked a little bit about the supply and demand issues. So moving forward, what are some initiatives you have on the table moving forward to really promote this topic?
One of my biggest initiatives that I cannot wait to do is host a white ribbon event. So the white ribbon talks about calling out men in our culture, society, in our communities who already do good work, who come alongside women in anti-trafficking work and or domestic violence, and they're already doing, using their voices and helping other men be part of the solution and not the problem. And so that is a big event I want to have sooner or later. Right now, I'm working on opening up a home for women, for survivors coming out of trafficking and addiction in New Hampshire. So I have my heart set on that, but I'm going to have this big event called White Ribbon, and I really want so many men to come and to celebrate and to really just think about, like, if men could just really be the protectors and defenders, like how, what they're supposed to do instead of the abusers and oppressors. Like, it would just be amazing. Like, I don't think masculinity is toxic. Like, I love a good, strong man, like any day. And that's really what I really want to call out and celebrate.
So can you talk a little bit too about your work in the United Nations?
That has been an amazing thing as well. I got invited to speak at the United Nations side panel years ago by a good friend who's in healthcare, who is training healthcare professionals about trafficking. And she wanted to help hospitals and healthcare systems make protocols and policies to implement. So when victims come in, they can be identified and then offer them services. Because so many hospitals years ago didn't understand what trafficking is. Today, they might know what trafficking because they've been trained, but they don't know what to do with the women or the victims, right? So she's really developed procedures and protocols around that. And we've trained healthcare systems globally. And just recently at the United Nations, was it last month, we presented this to the World Health Organization, and they're reviewing it to adopt it as policy for all healthcare. So that was pretty amazing.
That's wonderful.
That's great.
That's great work.
Primacare is Southeastern New England's trusted leader in medical care. With offices in Fall River and surrounding communities, we're dedicated to your well-being. Our carefully selected team of more than 150 providers offers world-class primary and specialty medical care. Primacare doctors are supported by a skilled staff trained to deliver comprehensive radiology, imaging, and testing services. Primacare is large enough to take care of all your medical needs, but small enough to care for you personally. Primacare is by your side.
Jasmine, what can we do? Like, normal average Joes. Just like what? So if we want to do something, like you have a website, is there anything that we can tag on that to go to, or like what can we just do to help this cause?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me on here and sharing my information, my website. I would definitely suggest having conversations with people in your life, nieces, nephews, kids, and spreading awareness and reading other books written by survivors, watch real documentaries about the commercial sex trade, share those organizations on social media and just have these awkward, hard conversations. You know, like sex trafficking is a thing. It exists. It happens in every zip code. You know, you can also host a Bags of Hope event. I love when we do that. People do it often. They do donation drives for Bags of Hope, and we come down to your facility, your church, your work, your school, wherever it is, and you guys can host a donation drive, and then we can fill bags together. You can hear from one of the survivors on our team, and that's a great way to be involved. You can also donate financially. Of course, we, you know, always need that to support the work that we do and the survivors that we serve. And I mean, you're doing it now. This podcast is great, so I'm really grateful.
We're honored to have you on.
Absolutely.
So, is there one last message you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think just, if I haven't already, just help you really understand that no little girl dreams of becoming a prostitute, right? That isn't something on our list. We want to be teachers, veterinarians, nurses, mothers. We don't want to be prostitutes. That something happens traumatic along the way. We get involved in a situation that we can't get out. And before we know it, it's too late and we're trapped. And then it becomes this whole cycle of the identity, the trauma, the abuse. And really, we just need more support and services around raising awareness, knowing the links between domestic violence, trafficking, addiction, and catching this and talking about it with the kids and the people in our lives, for sure.
Can I ask a question? Because we have a lot of parents who'll be watching this, and I'm sure you talk to your kids all the time about your experiences. At least I suspect you do. How do we deal with this as parents? What should be the message to parents out there that are watching this? How do they communicate with their kids?
Oh my gosh, it just sounds corny and the whole thing, but like internet safety, right? Like if you're going to hand your kid an iPhone, then you need to have internet blocking on there. You need to have some kind of bark or covenant eyes, some kind of system that's going to like protect them, because the number one place that traffickers find their victims are online.
And we've heard
where
this
does
before.
everyone hang out today? Online. We don't hang out on the streets anymore. We don't hang out in the mall as much. It's online. And these young kids are so naive and they're starving for attention and love. And even young girls as young as middle school have been approached by traffickers, and, you know, they run away, they get involved, or they get contacted because they're on Instagram.
Right.
And it's so inwardly focused, right? They're posting all these photos of themselves constantly with the filters. And then some person comes along and tells them that they can post those same provocative pictures, or even, you know, more provocative pictures on OnlyFans and get paid for it. Right. And this seems like a good idea. So you have to know who your kids are talking to and what websites and apps they're going to. There's a war going out there, and it's on the internet, and that's the number one place.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, when they think of human trafficking, they probably think of, you know, you're walking out of a mall, a van screams up, pulls you into the van, takes off, and then you're never heard from again. And I'm sure that happens, actually. But I think what I'm hearing and what I've read is that a lot of this starts on the internet, and that's where they make connections. So that's great advice. And then, you know, to the boys out there, it's, you know, there's so much that goes on with pornography on the internet and all that. I don't think that men realize that these are not willing participants often in that industry, that they're often women who are being abused and forced into that environment. I'm sure there are some willing actors, or so to speak, but it's probably the minority, I'm guessing.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And,
so
you
we
know,
have to educate.
And how do you change that? I guess it's education, but I guess it all starts with, as you said, you know, having control over, or having a knowledge at least of what your kids are involved in. So, and that's a hard thing. So, well, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. Where can people find your book, by the way?
I got it on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. You can go to my website, jasminegrace.org, and there is a link right there to Amazon.
And it's The Diary of Jasmine Grace, Trafficked, Recovered, and Redeemed. And it's available, sounds like, pretty easily, which is wonderful. So, and
and if anyone would like to buy anything in bulk, they can reach out to me, and we can send it for, you know, less money than on Amazon.
That's wonderful. And how do people reach you if they they have questions or whatnot? Is there a contact that they can make through your organization?
Yep. Sure. You can go to jasminegrace.org and fill out the form. It goes to info@jasminegrace. Instagram is Jasmine Grace Marino. Facebook is Jasmine Grace Outreach. And please share my information. Let me know if there's anyone that I can help, or women that you know who need the services. Please refer them in as well.
That's wonderful.
That's great. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I think we have to wrap it up.
We do.
It's been an hour, but it's gone by so quickly. Been really wonderful. So thank you very much, Jasmine. I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I think that a lot of our viewers will really benefit from this. And the book, once again, is The Diary of Jasmine Grace. I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to our show. And if you'd like to become a sponsor, contact us at 774-319-4230. This is how we support these types of efforts. Special thanks to Ron Gamache for our intro music and the PC Institute for producing our show. Bay Coast Bank, also our sponsor. We want to thank them, of course. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank. I'll call 508-678-7641 to learn more. Jasmine, thank you so much. It's been great spending this time with you. We've really learned a lot. We appreciate you sharing
Thanks,
this
guys.
information.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.